Well, good evening. I greet you all in Jesus' name this evening. I'm sure at this point I've piqued all of your curiosity if you saw the pictures that I sent. So what I decided to do this evening is kind of do a part two to the last topic or discussion that I had on Wednesday evening, which was on the Bible, the inerrant word. I felt like there was quite a bit more material there to go, and so I kind of came back to that, and we'll kind of do a part two of that. So I'm not going to go over everything that we had talked about the last time. You'll remember that, hopefully. But last time we didn't have a whole lot of time for discussion. I did a lot of the talking. So this time I want to hear from you all. So I'm telling you that now so you can prepare. So tonight I'm kind of going more for the inspired word. Last time we looked at the inerrant word, how it does not have errors, it is accurate, and how archaeological evidence supports that. And tonight I want to look at more the inspired word and how things were written in the Bible that weren't confirmed or discovered until many years later, and even quite recently. But then I also want to hear from you all in how something that was written 2,000 years ago or whatever it can be recently, it can be whenever, really spoken to you and felt like it was written for you. You know what I mean? Because since it is inspired by God, it's just as relevant today as it was then. So I want to hear from examples from you all then later. How has the Bible, something you read somewhere just really spoke to you, and you felt like it was written just for you? So you can be thinking about that. So, of course, the ground verse for this, of course, is 2 Timothy 3:16. We can probably all quote it. All Scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness. And tonight, like I said, we're going to focus in on that by inspiration of God a little bit more. Last time I had mentioned that the Bible has approximately 40 different authors, and all of them agree with each other. So, we want to look at a lot of different examples basically tonight that I'm going to take the approach that science confirms the Bible, or that the Bible said it and science more recently confirmed it. So I have quite a few verses that I want to read. I think what I'm going to do, I want you guys to participate tonight. So I don't know, we can either take volunteers for this, or it might be easier if we just start at the front. I'm going to give you the book and the chapter, and you can just turn there, and then I'll give you the exact verses later, because you probably won't remember if I give them to you now. That way you can be ready for that later. So maybe if we just start at the front here and work back through. So let's go Isaiah 40. Austin and Spencer take Job 26, and Dalen take Jeremiah 33, and Jordan 1 Corinthians 15, and Justin Psalm 147, and Ryan Job 28, and Keith Job 38, Maynard Ecclesiastes 1, Harold 2 Samuel 22, and Delbert Jonah 2, and David Job 38 as well, and Caleb Leviticus 17, Roger Job 26, Steve Job 36, and Peter Job 28. Now that's a lot of verses, but most of these are just one verse, so it won't take that long. So when I call on you, I will give you the full reference then, and then you can read those verses. So the first one we want to look at is Isaiah 40, verses 21 and 22. So you can go ahead and read those.
Have ye not known, have ye not heard, hath it not been told you from the beginning? Have ye not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers that stretcheth out from heaven as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent dwelling.
Okay, the main thing we want out of there is the circle of the Earth. If you go back in history at all, you know that for a while there, people thought the Earth was flat. Even Christopher Columbus was, when he set sail for the New World, going the wrong direction, hoping to go around the world. That was a new concept. People didn't think he would come back because they didn't think the world was round. Well, now that we have satellites and we've had people in space, we can confirm that the Earth is indeed a sphere, and we orbit in a circle around the sun. Isaiah said it right there, circle of the Earth. There's another one in there that I think, okay, I don't have it as a separate one, but it kind of goes along with that as in the space theme, and that is the expanding universe. The universe is expanding. No, it's not from the Big Bang, but it is expanding. We can measure it. We can measure that expansion, and it's interesting because in Genesis, or maybe it's not. There's somewhere it says that he scattered the stars, and also here in Isaiah it says he stretched out the heavens as a curtain. And he spreads them as a tent to dwell in. So that right there also, only recently have we been able to actually confirm that the Earth is, or the universe is indeed expanding. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here, but that has an effect on some telescope observations. The second one here is Job 26, verse 7.
It stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing.
There again, we have the word stretching out. What we're really going here is he hangs the earth on nothing. If you go back far enough, there was many different theories as to how the earth was, or how it was, I guess. The Chinese thought it rode on the back of a turtle, and because they thought it's got to sit on something. I don't know why they picked a turtle, but the Greeks, of course, thought Atlas, a really strong man, carried the earth on his back. You've probably seen pictures depicting that. But of course, now we know that, no, the earth is basically free floating in space. Yes, it's held in by the gravity of the sun, and it orbits around the sun because of that, but there's nothing attached to it or supporting it. And as Job said, the earth hangs on nothing. Okay, Jeremiah 33, verse 22.
As the host of heaven cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured, so will I multiply the seed of David my servant, and the Levites that minister unto me.
So there we get the host of heaven, referring to the stars, cannot be numbered, neither the sand of the sea measured. And this is the one that I was trying to get you curious about earlier, I guess. So on a clear night, you can see about 2,000 stars. And so up until the invention of good telescopes, that was pretty much the limit of what people thought there were, about 2,000 stars. Well, as telescopes keep getting more powerful and stronger, we keep learning that no, what we can see is a fraction of what there actually is, and the more we see, the more we know how much we don't see. And so current estimates, instead of 2,000, place it more in the 200 billion trillion range. So that's quite a lot of zeros. So we've all heard of the Hubble Space Telescope. Actually, first I want to do in 2008, an estimate by the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, which catalogs observable objects in about a third of the sky. They can only see about a third of the sky. In 2008, they had estimated that they had cataloged 48 million stars. So that means they had documented 48 million stars that they've observed. But our sun, which is our star, wouldn't even be big enough to show up on their list. So, and our sun is by no means a small star. There's smaller ones, of course, but it's not the largest or the smallest. So that shows you how limited of a range that they were looking at. But in October 2016, you've probably seen Hubble Deep Field Images, and that was the second picture that I sent. But they aimed the Hubble Space Telescope at a spot in the sky that they thought was pretty dark. They didn't know of a whole lot there. And instead of doing their normal several-hour exposure, they decided to do a much longer exposure. And so over the course of 10 days, they took over 300 exposures, which, when added together, came to over 100 hours of exposure. So instead of just a few hours like normal, it was over 100 hours. And what they found is what has come to be known as a deep field image. Images of stars much further away than we would normally observe. And that, yeah, the black image that I sent, is one of those deep field images, and you all saw exactly how many stars were in that, and that comes from a dark portion of the sky. So just think what a bright portion would look like. The total number of stars is similar to the number of molecules in 30 drops of water. So that's just another way to look at that. I kind of went down a rabbit hole on this one, if you couldn't tell, so I'm just going to kind of take a little bunny trail here, because I want to really just blow your mind, kind of like I did, like my mind was blown. So the other picture that I sent was pictures from 3 different infrared telescopes. And the reason they're infrared comes back to what we were saying earlier about expanding universe. So you can think of it this way: what starts out as visible light, as it comes toward us, because the universe is expanding, it gets stretched, which lowers the frequency, and by the time it gets to us, it's infrared instead of visible. So to say all that, the Hubble Space Telescope, we've all seen pictures from there, looks at visible light. But because so much of that is stretched, there's a vast portion that it can't even see. And so that's where infrared is so important, because it can see those lower frequency that was visible at one point. So I want to, I hope you all saw that first picture I sent. The picture on the left that was like the most blurry is from WISE, or the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. And it was designed to look at a much wider field of view, which is why, even though it was from 2009 and newer than the other one, it didn't have quite as good of a resolution. So when we're defining resolution, that is the ability of a telescope to pick out, or to get it down to a dot that it can resolve. Otherwise, it's just a blob. Okay. So the human eye can resolve, and these are all measured in arc seconds, which is, in simplified terms, a portion of like how much the Earth rotates in a certain amount of time. So it's kind of that measurement. The moon, to give you an idea, the moon is about, I was going to write it down, I forget. I think it's 30 arc. Yeah, 30 arc minutes. The moon is about 30 arc minutes. All of these are defined in arc seconds, so that would be 1/60th of that. So 1 arc second would be half of a arc. Anyway, you get the point. If the moon is 30 arc minutes, the human eye can resolve about 40 arc seconds. So about 40 arc seconds. That first picture that was on the left there, that is from WISE, or Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. That can resolve between 6 and 12 arc seconds. So finer than the human eye. The Spitzer Space Telescope, which is the second one, can resolve about 2 arc seconds. And the James Webb Space Telescope, which was the one on the far right, can resolve 0.1 arc seconds. So human eye is 40, this is 0.1. Now that's still not as good as Hubble. Hubble can resolve 0.04 arc seconds. But the difference there is it's visible light instead of infrared. And so even though it has a finer resolution, it can't see all the light, and so there's a lot of detail that's missing out on. So that was just to boggle your mind. The James Webb Space Telescope, if you haven't ever heard of it before, was the largest space telescope ever put up. It was the reflecting mirror on it is 18 different segments. It was too big to put on top of a rocket. So they designed it to fold up into, the mirror itself folds up into 3 different sections, and then in a complex origami unfolding, over 300 hinge points had to unfold perfectly to get it out to its deployed configuration. It's the largest mirror ever deployed, and that's why people are so excited about it. It's not necessarily a replacement for Hubble because it's looking at different spectrum, but it's better than anything we've had. And it launched on Christmas Day last year, and it took several months to get to its orbit, and in the last month or so they've been calibrating it. And the picture there that I sent is actually just a test image. That's not even a research image yet. We're still in the testing calibration phase, so it's going to get even better. But yeah, anyway, so that was the rabbit hole I went down on that one. Basically, the point is, we thought we knew there's a lot of stars. We haven't even scratched the surface, because if you look in that last picture, there's so many stars that you couldn't even begin to see on the first 2 images. So, and actually a lot of those are also galaxies, not individual stars. So keep in mind there'd be several billion more stars in each galaxy then. So, and then it says that God names them all. Like, just mind-blowing. And that is actually our next point. Each star is unique. So we will have 1 Corinthians 15:41 and Psalm 147, verse 4 at this time.
There is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. One star differeth from another star in glory. He telleth the number of the stars. He calleth them all by their names.
So that's exactly what I just said there. He numbers them all. He calls them by name. And each one is different. And we have observed that. There's small stars, there's big stars, there's bright stars, there's dim stars, there's red stars, there's white stars, there's blue stars, and has to do with different temperatures and their density and gravity and things like that. But still, each one is created unique, and even though in Genesis it's just one line, he created the stars also. It's, yeah. And people used to think that all the stars were the same. If you look from the Earth, they all look pretty similar, but now we have the ability to see that each one is in fact unique. All right, Job 28, verses 24 to 25.
For he looketh to the ends of the earth, and seeth under the whole heaven, to make the weight for the winds, and he weighteth the waters by measure.
To make the weight for the winds, and he weigheth the waters by measure. Would you say that the air has weight tonight? We know today that it does, but people didn't always think that. People thought the air is weightless. But now we know that the air does in fact have weight. And when you compare that with the weight of water that it was talking about there as well, we get something called buoyancy. And that's why things float in water sometimes. So yeah, right there in Job, it talks about things that we couldn't prove until much, much later, when we could begin studying the density of materials and why they're different from each other. Job 38, verses 18 to 20.
Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare it, thou knowest it all. Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? That thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, that thou shouldest know the path to the house thereof.
Talking about light having a path and a place where it's going. People used to think that light was it just was. It wasn't going anywhere, it wasn't doing anything, but now we know that light travels in photons as electromagnetic waves. Sunlight, because of that, takes over 8 minutes to reach us from the sun, even though it's a great distance. And light always travels in a vacuum at exactly the same speed, and that is a constant, because it is so always the same. It is a scientific constant, the speed of light in a vacuum. And because of that, then we can use that to measure great distances, such as the distance that light travels in a year known as a light year, usually used when we're talking about measuring galaxies and things. Just, yeah, the mind-blowing expanse again, just that we have to define it in terms of how fast light, which is something we can't even see how fast it goes in a whole year. Ecclesiastes 1:6.
The wind goeth toward the south, and turneth about unto the north. It whirleth about continually, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits.
Okay, keep your finger in there. We're going to need to come back to there later. I didn't put that down as a separate one. But talking about the wind, people used to think that the wind blew in a straight line. Well, it does depending where you're standing, but it usually travels in more of a circle, especially when it becomes strong, such as a hurricane or a tornado. Always spiraling, but we couldn't tell that until we had satellites and radar where we could observe that and see that spiral. But yeah, it says it goes toward the south and it turns about toward the north. It whirleth. It's right there in Ecclesiastes. 2 Samuel 22, verse 16, and also Jonah 2, the first 6 verses, so verses 1 to 6.
And the channels of the sea appeared, the foundations of the world were disturbed at the rebuking of the Lord, at the collapse of the breach of his nostrils.
Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord his God out of the fish's belly, and said, I cried by reason of mine affliction unto the Lord, and he heard me out of the belly of hell cried out, I, and thou heardest my voice. For thou canst cast me into deep, in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about. All thy billows and thy waves passed over me. Then I said, I am cast out of thy sight, yet I will look again toward the holy temple. The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depths closed me around about. The weeds were wrapped around my head. I went down to the bottoms of the mountains. The earth with her bars was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought me up my life from corruption, O Lord my God.
So did you ever wonder how long Jonah sank before he was swallowed? It says he went down to the bottoms of the mountains. I never quite caught that before. Now, whether he was speaking figuratively or literally, I guess we don't really know, but it does say into the deep and to the bottom of the mountains. So the point there, and also the verse that Harold read, talks about channels in the sea and mountains. The ocean floor used to be thought of as just flat as a beach, but it's not. It's got deep valleys. In fact, the deepest place in the earth is in the bottom of the ocean, and huge mountains, huge crevices, underwater formations similar to what you would see if you went out west, spires and stuff like that. Very unique. It's not flat at all. And Job mentioned down to the bottoms of the mountains. Also on the bottom of the ocean, Job 38, verse 16.
Have you entered the springs of the sea, or have you walked in search of the depths?
So that's talking about the springs of the sea, and there are springs in the bottom of the ocean. People thought for a long time that it was only fed by rain and water running into it, the rivers. But no, it has springs in the bottom as well. And you can also see that when you read about the flood, it talks about the fountains of the deep being broken up, which is water coming out of the ocean floor. Leviticus 17, verse 11.
For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes an atonement for the soul.
Talking about the life of the flesh is in the blood. If you went back into the Middle Ages, but even after that, 1700s, it was common for, if you were sick, you would go to the doctor to be bled. He would literally usually use leeches or something. They thought they had to remove the bad blood. But now we know that Blood is the source of life and health. It's the way that the body carries nutrients and oxygen. It removes waste from the cells. It's critical to the functioning of the body. And yes, there are times where you may need to add more blood, but you don't want to remove blood. And it was said right there in Leviticus, life is in the blood. Job 26, verse 8, and Job 36, 27 to 30. I want to make sure. Yeah, I did give those. 27 to 30 for Job 36. Let's have Job 26, verse 8.
He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them.
For he maketh small the drops of water, they pour down rain according to the vapor thereof, which the clouds do drop and distill upon man abundantly. Also, can any understand the spreadings of the clouds or the noise of his tabernacle? Behold, he spreadeth his light upon it, and covereth the bottom of the sea.
Another way of reading the verse that Roger read is God stores water in the clouds, but they don't burst. Did you ever think about how water just stays suspended and then falls when it needs to? Until about 400 years ago or so, people weren't sure how water got in the clouds. They just knew that it came out of clouds. But now we know something called the water cycle. It evaporates, and then in the right conditions, it'll condense. And when it condenses enough, it will fall, and that's precipitation. And we can see that in the verses from Job 36 there. He draws up the drops of water, evaporation. They distill his mist in the rain, condensation, and the skies pour down and drop on mankind abundantly. That's from the ESV, but that's precipitation. So we see all three parts of the water cycle right there. Job 28, verse 5.
As for the earth, out of it cometh bread, and under it it is turned up as it were fire.
So the part talking about bread there is basically saying the fields on the surface, and it says under it is turned up as it were fire. People knew that volcanoes were hot, but they didn't know where that's coming from. But now we know from studying earthquakes and seismic tremors, we can see how what the consistency of the core of the earth is, and we can see that it is a liquid, and from observing volcanoes we can see it is indeed molten rock. And volcanoes are caused by shifting tectonic plates. There's no way that Job could have known that. He didn't know that the earth has different plates that move around. So anyway, that is the end of that list. What about you all? Do you have some time where you were reading along and something jumped out at you as being written for you specifically, even though it was written many, many years ago? I want to hear from you all.
This is a very different tone from what you have been going, but at our house we're talking about cooking and all the scientifics. I mean, not all, but some of the scientifics that go along with that. Job is a very scientific book, and I did not realize, but Job 6, verse 6 says, "Can that which is unsavory be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg?" I did not realize there was a Bible verse that actually talks about the taste of food as far as whether the egg white's egg yellow is the best.
That's very interesting. That goes right along with what I was saying. It's not a different direction at all. The Bible really does know what it's talking about, and sometimes we like to think that it doesn't. Anybody else have a time that something?
Not really, nothing new, but I was reading the creation yesterday or today. So God spoke everything into being. How did it take him a day? I pondered that, He said words and he said a lot. with power, but he'd wait for the next day to do something different. Maybe he spoke it and then stood back and watched it all transition and appear.
Well, it would seem that he did, because he specifically said, and it was good. So he obviously had observed it enough to know that it was indeed working the way it was supposed to, and it was good. And also, it obviously took something out of him, because at the end of a week of that, he needed a break.
One of the things I'm blessed by is the fact that God doesn't change in His Word. One of the verses somebody just read recently is something about drops of water, and we hear this technology is raining cats and dogs. Where does that come from? Next time somebody says it's raining cats and dogs, I guess look to see what color that is. I know we have a lot of weird dogs out there, but God's Word doesn't change, okay? For some reason the English language seems to change in our vocabulary. Sometimes we find ourselves using it too. But maybe you use that word too, I don't know. Raining cats and dogs. No, it's drops of water.
I think that's implying that the water droplets are large, but I know what you're saying.
This isn't specifically a verse, but that Hubble deep field picture is always just awed me. And the thing that I grapple with is why did God go to the bother to make something that vast? It's taken man approximately 6,000 years to figure out how vast it is. And it just boggles my mind.
And the more vast that we discover it is, the more we know that there's more that we don't know. Anybody else?
Building on the thought that Michael had, there's a verse in the Bible that says something about God concealing a matter and kings searching it out. Something about it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. So I wonder if He doesn't get glory out of seeing us try to figure out what He did.
Mm-hmm. Seems no matter if you go small and look at microscopic things, or if you go large, if you go to the bottom of the ocean, all these places where you can't just see. The further we go, the more we find, the more we just see God's fingerprints all over it.
Another reason would be that simply He enjoys His creation. As infinitely greater than, say, a master craftsman would enjoy putting his best into whatever his last project was, and seeing that it had turned out well and it was useful and it was benefiting people. So wisdom personified in Proverbs 8 is portrayed as rejoicing in his inhabited world. And Psalm 104, may the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in His works.
In all the places that God could have chosen to be, He chose to come to the Garden of Eden and walk with Adam and Eve in the cool of the day. I think that says something too. You know, He does enjoy His creation. I don't want to drag it out too long. One last chance. Anybody have anything just burning on your tongue?
I was thinking about how we often take for granted the fact that there's a law of gravity carrying something that's fairly heavy earlier this week. And it dawned on me, what would it be like if we didn't have any weight? That kind of goes back to the idea that the air has weight. But the whole idea of gravity, I don't know that it's necessarily mentioned in Scripture that way. But when you look at some of the miracles that Jesus performed, it's like he went against the laws of what we could consider natural laws. And yet to him, it was nothing. Because he was the one that created it. He knew how the laws were created. And to him, it wasn't anything unusual for him to be able to go against those laws. And yet, it's a testament to his faithfulness that we have these natural laws, like gravity, that we can depend on a consistent basis.
If I was creating something like that where you had nothing before that, and you'd think, at some point you'd have to come to the realization, oh, I need something that's going to make these people I'm making stick to this big ball that I'm hanging out in space. Like, you thought of everything. You can't make it too strong, or they won't be able to move, or you make it too light, and they won't stick. So, just dialed it in perfectly.
Colossians 1 is probably the closest I can think of in Scripture that talks about gravity, but not by that name. Speaking of Christ, of course, being the image of the invisible God, by him all things were created, and so on. But down in verse 17, and he is before all things, and in him all things consist, or put together.
The four fundamental forces of nature that we are still exploring. Strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, gravity, and electromagnetic. I don't know if you've ever, this is kind of, it's not so much from the Bible, but it's from creation, so I found it interesting as well. I don't know if you've heard the term bionics, but it is developing technology that mimics, they would say nature, but we're going to say God's design tonight. And it's not, okay, the first one doesn't fall into bionics, but the rest of these do. But of course, Noah was instructed by God to build the ark 6 times longer than it is wide. And for some reason, that's still the ratio today that we build ships, even with all our modern engineering methods and supercomputers that can model, fluid dynamics and whatever. That 6-to-1 ratio is still the most stable ratio to build a boat. And it's just interesting that that's exactly the dimensions that God gave Noah. But the rest of these then kind of fall under bionics. I'm just quickly going to go over these. I found these interesting as well. When programming movements for robots, it is quite common to draw inspiration from the movements of animals, specifically kangaroos, to improve the movements of robots. Of course, we've all heard the story of how Velcro was invented in 1948 by Swiss engineer George de Mestral after studying the burrs on his dog's fur. He copied the hooks and the burrs, and we have Velcro. Lumberjack blades around 1800 greatly improved when they were modeled after a wood-burrowing beetle. The jaws of a wood-burrowing beetle, they shaped the teeth on the lumberjack blades similarly, and they were much more efficient. Reflectors, we use them everywhere. Car headlights, mirrors. But when shaping reflectors, people have commonly studied cat's eyes, because a cat's eye is a giant reflector that allows it to amplify light and see in the dark. A more recent development is smart fabrics. We haven't seen a whole lot of these yet, but they change based on temperature. So like they would maybe change their density or something. So when it's cold, they would shrink and get thicker, and when it's warm, they would open up. And that's based on pine cones, how they open based on humidity. Aircraft wings that change shape based on speed, not just the sweep or the angle of the flaps, but the actual shape of the wing. Also, like hummingbird wings will change their angle depending on their speed. Cholesteric liquid crystals that change color based on temperature. Be similar to what we see in some geckos and some things like that. Nanostructures on butterfly wings have contributed to development of photonics, which is electronics that instead of using electricity use light. Also RFID tags, which would be like well, there's a lot of different uses for them, but one would be the tags on like clothing and stuff in stores. It sets off the buzzer if you go out the door. Easy Pass would be another example of that. Also sensors that detect explosives, all inspired by the nanostructures on butterfly wings. There's a huge shopping center in Zimbabwe that the cooling system was modeled after a termite mound to achieve very efficient cooling passively. So no fans, it just ventilates. The adhesive that mussels use to attach to rocks and piers and boats inspired bioadhesives for use inside the human body, gluing together veins, arteries, and things. So that was just some interesting things that I found I wanted to share with you this evening. It kind of took a detour from maybe where we started, but hope we can be more inspired by the God that we serve, that we can see that He does care for each of us, and He has our best in mind, and He designed a perfect world to put His perfect creation in. So that's all I have. I'll turn it back over to the moderator.